Hello, everybody. My name is Luciana Ghiotto. I am from the Transnational Institute. I am based in Argentina, though. And we're together here with the mission to have an interesting discussion on a topic that surely has brought all of us together in campaigns all over the world, which is trade issues. And especially what we're trying to do is to try to understand how Trump and his new tariffs are changing the global scope of how trade is being managed today. So the name of this webinar of 1 hour that will be together today is Breaking Down Trump's Trade Attacks and Global Solidarity Organizing Call, and Global Solidarity. So what we're going to try to do today is to have the first discussion of a set of 2 discussions, that there will be another one, so don't miss that other discussion that we will be having. And what we have today is a group of people that have been working on these topics for a long time, from 2 main big networks where we have been working on these issues, which is OWIMS on the one side. Everybody might know already, but if you don't, that OWIMS has been probably, one of the biggest networks around the world that discusses trade issues. And what we have seen for 25 years already is the development of this big network of organizations that relates to trade unions, feminist movements, peasants movements, indigenous groups all over the world. And also another network that is launching these seminars and these debates that are so necessary is the European Trade Justice Coalition. So we want to thank everybody for being here and for allowing this debate that we'll have today. So regarding our panelists, I'm going to present our panelists. We're going to start with, first we'll have Diego López González from the International Trade Union Confederation. So then we'll also have Melanie Foley from Public Citizen. We'll have Morgan Odi from La Vía Campesina, and we're going to start this conversation right now. In case there are any questions, we have Ryan there helping from Public Citizen too. We can answer your questions on the chat. And also, if you have any questions during the seminar, what you can do is point down there the questions and answers button, and you will be read by all the group that is having this conversation today. So also, we want to let you know that you can present yourselves in the webinar. You can introduce your name and organization, and that this webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the different networks in the following days. If we have information on that, I will thank you, Ryan, on where we can find afterwards the links where we can find the seminar that has been recorded. Okay, then. So we will start first. With Melanie Foley. Melanie Foley is the Deputy Director of Public Citizen's Global Trade Watch, where she leads outreach and coalition building strategies to bolster GTW's campaigns, so the Global Trade Watch campaigns across global trade negotiations. So Melanie, you have your 12 minutes. You can start right now if you want. Thank you.
Thanks, Luciana. Let me see if I can share my screen. I have sending the request to share. And while we're waiting on that, I'll just start. As Luciana mentioned, I'm with Public Citizen. We are a US-based nonprofit consumer advocacy organization with over 1 million members and supporters. We've been leading many aspects of US civil society resistance to the Trump administration through litigation. We have over 20 lawsuits against many of the illegal actions of this administration. We're leading mobilization, coalition building to fight growing authoritarianism at home. And I'm with our Global Trade Watch division, which for decades has been monitoring US policy alongside our labor, environmental, family farm, and faith and consumer allies to advocate for transparency and accountability in trade negotiations. Let me see if I'm able to share. Perfect. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm with Public Citizen. The corporations have their lobbyists and the people need advocates too. That's our tagline. And this is just a picture of the infamous Battle in Seattle protest that a public citizen took part in helping to organize to outside of the World Trade Organization meeting. So we see Trump as a symptom of the dysfunction in our global trade system, not the cause. The trade justice movement has spent many decades fighting existing trade rules, free trade agreements, and institutions like the World Trade Organization that prioritize the market above all over other goals. And we were right. Current trade rules have destroyed decent jobs, damaged the planet, fueled the climate crisis, and undermined vital public services. So the promise that a rising tide would lift all boats has been a lie. The benefits have been delivered to the wealthy and the largest corporations, while inequality has grown and local businesses have lost out. So we are witnessing a move toward fascism, and among the driving factors behind this are current trade rules. Because too often the people whose jobs and communities have been destroyed in the name of free trade have been told that there's no alternative to the current trading system and have been given no acknowledgement of its problems. Yet what Trump proposes is not a solution, but a leap out of the frying pan and into the fire. And this is all part of Trump's con on working people. He has now twice won elections in part by weaponizing the very real frustrations that many US voters have with their place in an increasingly complex and unequal global economy. But instead of a real plan to uplift working people, Trump's trade agenda is just another ploy to consolidate his power and to further enrich himself and his billionaire friends. So on his infamous April 2nd Liberation Day, when he announced the tariffs, he described them as necessary because other countries had been taking advantage of us. Well, his diagnosis of the problem is hateful and wrong. So Trump is preying on real concerns about our unjust global trade system and offering up scapegoats, immigrants and other countries who supposedly took advantage of us. But for decades, the real culprits have been the US corporate giants that rigged the system in their favor through undue influence in undemocratic, secretive negotiations. Our official US trade advisory system gave 500 corporate advisors direct access and influence over negotiating texts, while the public was completely locked out. So the result were rules that benefited the profit-making of Wall Street, big pharma, and other corporate giants at the expense of working people here and around the world. So because his solution, sweeping unstrategic tariffs, will not actually protect good jobs, and this is especially the case since Trump is actively dismantling investments in domestic manufacturing and undermining workers in the US at every turn. So these tariffs are really leverage to get more trade deals. So he's using these as leverage to get more corporate dominated deals that will harm workers and also adding in his own brand of corruption and authoritarianism. So through imposition of blanket pain, he's able to then selectively relieve that pain and extract concessions. And this is allowing him to treat foreign countries the same way he's treating law firms and universities and media companies in the United States. So after announcing all of these tariffs, dozens of secretive negotiations have been ongoing. Most of these have resulted in some headline-grabbing deals that are not really deals. They're non-binding frameworks. But there have been a couple of actual deals announced, and I'll get to the terms of those in a little bit. So, there's this horrible quote from Trump where he says, countries are kissing my ass to make deals, and it's all just about leverage. So what does he want? What does he want in these negotiations? We see a couple different categories of the things that he's trying to achieve in the negotiations. Some of this is what we would call traditional trade stuff, reducing tariffs, which is exactly the kinds of agreements he's claimed to be against. There's global deregulation to benefit the biggest US businesses. And then there's what we're calling the wild card, kind of crazy things that you do not usually see in trade negotiations. Now, there has not been an actual explanation from the administration of what it is they're trying to achieve in these negotiations. So we've had to look to this corporate wish list. And on the April 2nd Liberation Day, Trump waved this report around. It's this annual report that's 400 pages listing the policies in other countries that US businesses do not like. It's called the National Trade Estimates Report, or as we like to call it, how to convince working people that foreign countries have taken their jobs when it was actually American corporations. So in looking through that report, we did an analysis of the hundreds of pages of comments submitted by the big tech corporations and found over 100 policies in 40 plus countries that big tech wants to have eliminated. And this includes things like Australia and Japan's revenue sharing and competition regulations, the EU's flagship AI Act, Norway and Brazil's data privacy laws, and the list goes on and on. So all of the big tech CEOs who were there for the inauguration have put in their demands for the laws and regulations they would like to see undone abroad under threat of tariffs. You can also see in this list is Big Pharma's hit list, for example, on India and Argentina's patenting standards to prevent evergreening, Japan and Korea's government pricing policies, Colombia's compulsory licensing of patents for AIDS treatments, and the list goes on. Now, aside from deregulation to benefit the biggest businesses, there's all kinds of wild card things that Trump may try to seek in these negotiations. That includes things like countries accepting deportees shipped under inhumane conditions, increased defense spending, and then just corruption and bribery. And we've seen a lot of that with, Trump getting permits for new golf courses and, gold statues and things like that seem to help get deals through. So there has finally been some text released on deals, including with Malaysia and Cambodia. And these are extremely one-sided deals where the other country is forced to do things like accept US health and safety standards with no additional checks, must accept US halal food certifications, and agrees to not enact or to repeal existing taxes on digital services companies and other regulations of big tech. So it's just a laundry list of concessions that the other country is expected to make. And on the US side, maybe the US will lower some tariffs or not. There's really very little that the US is agreeing to in this situation. I'll try to wrap quickly, but just thought I should mention the legal status of these tariffs is very much in question. 2 US courts have determined that these reciprocal tariffs, quote unquote, are illegal. The Supreme Court is hearing the case and will have the final say. So it's very ill-advised, I would say, for other countries to make binding concessions when these particular tariffs may be repealed. However, unfortunately, he has other authorities that he could use to enact tariffs. So there will be tariff threats continuing in one form or another. And I'll just end by saying that, really appreciate being on this call. Global solidarity is going to be very important for all of us right now. We are supporting governments to resist making concessions, especially around public health. We are rejecting pressure from, the more corporate side to revive the WTO as is. We do not see that as a solution to what Trump is doing, upending the system. And we're pushing for a new global model that is a fairer, development-focused global trade agenda that's able to meet the needs of humanity and ensure a livable planet. So I'll pause there and hand it back to you, Luciana.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Maybe if you can stop sharing. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was great because you respected very well the time that we had given to you. So thanks for that. So now we'll see what happens with Diego. Diego is our next speaker. Diego Lopez is the policy coordinator for economic and social policy in the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. So Diego, you have your 12 minutes. Thanks.
Happy to be with all of you to discuss these issues. So I would like to bring forward the visions from the trade unions, as I'm from the International Trade Union Confederation. And from the side of unions, we think that we cannot talk about the Trump tariffs without mentioning the damage and disillusionment that the neoliberal free trade model has caused. It's something that has given rise to what we have today. It's that disillusionment that has led certain right-wing leaders to get to power and then coming up with this approach to international trade. So unions have been very critical of this neoliberal model because it has contributed to a downward competition in wages and working conditions that has been used to attract investments and preferential trade partnerships. But the union movement generally views the use of tariffs as a legitimate trade policy instrument to advance industrial transformation, development, and to ensure the creation of decent jobs. However, what they are used for and how they are used matters. And in that sense, we are directly opposed to Trump's use of tariffs as a political tool, as a leverage for non-trade issues to advance an extreme right agenda. We see the Trump rhetoric around jobs, which is very dangerous. This bring back jobs to America and then putting competition on jobs between countries. But in reality, what we know is that the US administration does not really care about jobs. I mean, we have seen it with the policies that they've advanced, especially in the context of the Dodge process, where they have thrown away many federal workers that have lost their jobs. And that's the reality and the practice that the Trump administration has shown with respect to jobs. On the contrary, it's an excuse to advance a political agenda focused on deregulation, extending the power of digital companies, and contributing to undermining country sovereignty, as we've seen especially in the cases of Brazil and South Africa. But our main concerns as trade unions, apart from the political implications, are around the impact that these tariff policies are having on jobs in different sectors and countries. In addition, the impact on real wages. So we're seeing the fact that tariffs can give rise to inflation, and this will diminish workers' purchasing power because workers are also consumers. So real wages will end up falling with these increases in prices. In addition to this, there's also problems with commitments that we are seeing around investments related to fossil fuels, the arms industries, and chips in the context of the different agreements and negotiations that are taking place with the US administration. For example, with respect to the EU and US joint statement, we see there's a commitment for 600 billion new investments, for 750 billion US energy products, and 40 billion US AI chips. Also, in the South Korea agreement, there's a 100 billion commitment for US energy products. So all these investment commitments in energy, it's about fossil fuels, it's about contributing to the climate emergency and climate change and undermining the fight against climate change. It's also undermining the approach that different countries or regions can have towards strategic autonomy and subjugating their policies to the United States in terms of climate, in terms of digital. So there's big problems with that, but also problems related to deregulation. Digital, I mentioned before, and digital is very strongly present in the different negotiations that are taking place, freeing up digital markets for free flows of data and paving the road for US big tech companies. But also, for instance, in the EU-US joint statement, they talk about flexibilities in the corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which is about guaranteeing, making sure that big companies ensure human rights due diligence across the supply chain. So flexibilities across these due diligence directives are going to negatively harm workers. But I wanted to go into a few specific examples in regions and countries to show you the impact that this is having on workers. I will start with Africa. And generally in Africa, there's been a big impact because we previously had the Africa Growth Opportunity Act in the US. And so many countries which are very export dependent went from 0 to at least a baseline of 10% tariffs. And these countries have a high dependence on key exports in raw materials, agriculture, apparel, and textiles. Especially countries like Lesotho, Swatini, Kenya, Ethiopia have a strong dependence on the apparel sector, and they have been highly affected, leading to factory shutdowns, job losses, with the women disproportionately affected. In the case of Lesotho, for example, the 15% tariff rate that has been established means that around 12,000 jobs could be on the line. But also the application of different tariff rates can lead companies to move from one country to the other. So for instance, again, going back to Lesotho, they have a 15% tariff rate. So companies within South Africa that are next door could move to Lesotho, as in South Africa, Trump administration decreed a 30% tariff rate. And I would like to focus a bit on the case of South Africa because it's one of those very political approaches from the Trump administration to punish a country. There were unjustified accusations of attacks on white people upon the government on South Africa. There was the issue of the G20 presidency of South Africa, which focused on solidarity, equality, and sustainability, which was denounced by the Trump administration as a woke agenda, but also the role that South Africa has been playing in taking Israel to the International Criminal Court. So very political approach to establishing the tariff rate. And this has had a big impact on South African workers, as US is the second largest export market. So there's an estimation from our affiliates that roughly 500,000 people's jobs would be dependent on trade with the US and could be affected by this 30% tariff rate very strongly. And there is already an impact actually on the ground. And this is very severe in a country where you have 32% unemployment rate and a high dependence of unemployed family members on employed family members in this case. Another very hardly hit case is the one of Brazil, where there was an increase from a baseline 10% to 50% for most goods in exports to the US. And here we also see a political motivation. We have heard about the Bolsonaro trial and how Trump was unhappy with the results of that trial, but also the role that Brazil has been playing in the BRICS. So this is a clear case of interference in national sovereignty and in the independence of the country's judicial system. And what we see is that with the new tariff rate, 55% of Brazilian exports to the US would be impacted. So our affiliates in Brazil have done some estimates on job losses in the next 1 or 2 years. The most conservative estimates are around 146,000 jobs being impacted, and the most harsh estimates reach 726,000 jobs, with more or less 300,000 jobs directly impacted, because we also need to take into account the indirect impacts in terms of job losses. And these would be jobs in manufacturing, metalworking, food and agriculture, wood, chemical, apparel, and footwear. And then I also wanted to talk about Europe, as there we also have a lot of unions which are concerned about the impact on jobs in the steel and automotive industries. And you might say, well, there is already an agreement that has been signed, so things shouldn't be so bad. But in fact, the impact continues. So we had some estimates from the European Trade Union Institute prior to the signing of this EU-US joint statement, which looked at the impact of the 20% tariff rate on all EU exports. And in that case, what they saw is that 750,000 jobs could be at risk, with a strong impact on manufacturing jobs. Now, we've gone down from 20% to 15%, so you can imagine that still a big number of jobs will be impacted, especially as there is no clear resolution on the issues of US tariffs on steel and aluminum, automobile parts, and others. But we're also hearing the challenges that workers are facing in the US. Unemployment and inflation have continued rising since the adoption of tariffs. They haven't been reduced. And so this has a direct impact also on workers in the US. But there's also the uncertainty of business being reluctant to make investments in that context. So it will be hard for new jobs to be created in this uncertain context. So what are unions doing in response to this? At national level, unions are demanding support to workers in sectors that will be exposed to tariffs. So they're entering in negotiations with their governments, advocating for concrete measures. In the case of Brazil, the Brazilian government has consulted the unions and advanced measures to protect employment and support exporting companies. South African unions are also engaging with their government on support measures that could be related to industrial policy, financing, and wage supplements. But we're also concentrating at international level our advocacy efforts on denouncing the devastating effects of the Trump tariffs on jobs, either directly or indirectly, and trying to emphasize the importance of a rules-based system. We need clear rules, but these rules need to be rewritten in the interest of people and based on solidarity, and not be based on what we had before with the current free trade model. So we think that these rules also need to put decent work creation and development at the center in order to make sure that they benefit people, as the neoliberal free trade model did not deliver for workers, and it impacted wages, working conditions, and made them the adjustment variable. So we're putting forward all our efforts, advocacy efforts around this issue, and trying to advocate for a different trade model. Thank you.
Excellent, Diego. Thank you very much for that. Again, thank you for sticking to the time. So we have our last speaker now, who is Morgan Odi. She is the general coordinator of La Vía Campesina. And Morgan has recently stated this phrase that I really liked, this idea of food must not be used as weapons for geopolitical and trade wars. So we want to listen to you, Morgan. Thank you very much. You have your 12 minutes.
Hello, I'm trying to reactivate my camera. Okay, great.
There, we see you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. So indeed, I will speak on behalf of La Vía Campesina, the global peasant movement. We represent over 180 organizations all over the world of small-scale farmers, peasants, and rural workers. La Vía Campesina, so we are over 30 years now. We were created in '93, and we were created basically against the policies linked to the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Funds, and the dramatic effects that these neoliberal policies had on peasants and other rural workers. And up to nowadays, we stand against free trade, against neoliberal policies, and against the World Trade Organization and different bilateral or bi-regional free trade agreements. So, for example, we stand against the CPTPP. We also stand against the project of a European Union Mercosur free trade agreement. So for us, tariffs and non-tariff barriers are tools to protect and defend food sovereignty and, more generally speaking, national production. So we are not against tariffs. We are not against non-tariff barriers. We think that they can be very useful tools of public policies. There are other useful tools to protect the local production, for example, minimum entry prices. But well, generally speaking, we do support tariff and non-tariff barriers. Well, especially non-tariff barriers, as if we speak of non-tariff barriers for food, this comes for cultural, very often for cultural standards and sanitary standards. So very often they are very useful, and we do believe that each people, each country should have the right to defend, to decide about what they want to eat and to defend their local food customs, and so yeah. So we do think that it's important. Yet, of course, we are against the weaponization of tariff. And I think it's important to say that what we are denouncing is not so much the tariff to enter the US market. That can be legitimate. The US, just like any other country, can have the right to put a tariff or other non-tariff barriers to enter the US market. But in each of the agreements that the US is doing with other countries, it always targets market access towards the other countries. So that is the big problem. For example, with Indonesia, so the bargaining was for Indonesian exports towards the US to go from 32% to 19%. But the other way around, the US exports to Indonesia will be entering at nearly 0%. So through this negotiation, the US is gaining huge market access to other countries against the food sovereignty of so many people. The US are also attacking market regulation in different countries. And here there is a very clear example with Canada. The US is threatening Canada of a very important tariff over 50%. In particular, they want the Canadian system of market regulation for dairy, the supply management system, to be dismantled. So for us, this is a direct attack towards the food sovereignty of Canada, and this is not acceptable. In the same way, we know that the US, they want to dismantle the system of market regulation that India has, based on the public stock and minimum support price for all the agricultural products of India. And India is a huge country of small-scale farmers. So if India would dismantle the market regulation, that would be a tragedy. So that the tariff, in fact, is another tool of neoliberalism, of neoliberal imperialism, we can say. And this is the big problem that we have with this US tariff. In most of the agreements, actually, Trump is pushing the other countries to accept importing a lot of energy from the US, which is most of the time fossil fuel energy and very much polluting energy. So yeah, once again, creating huge market access for the US company against the sovereignty, and in particular against the food sovereignty of the companies. Well, once we have said that, I think that in our analysis as well, we think that this tariff war made by Trump shows the waning power of the US dollar, the increasing problem linked to the US debt, and the increasing problem linked to the US dependence over imports. And this is, more generally speaking, in the global north, there has been a huge wave of financiarization, and the countries of the global north got very rich through the financiarization, but they also disindustrialized massively over the last decades. And now this model is getting to a limit, very much linked to geopolitical issues, the conflictuality between China and US, and also obviously the conflict with Russia. So in La Via Campesina, we keep defending the necessity to build food sovereignty and to guarantee the right to food. And we do believe that we should keep defending a vision based on delinking. You know, this is this vision from Samir Amin, who say that, well, the colonial legacy is that the countries from the global north, they took over the control of countries and the people from the global south to take the resources, and the countries from the global south need to regain the control for their territory and economy and have their territory work for their own people. And so this vision, it's really at the core of the vision for food sovereignty. And so because of this, we do believe that really right now, it is a very high necessity, and it is the right moment to push even more for agrarian reform, because we need the land, the water, the territory of the countries, and especially of the countries of the global south, to produce what the local people need, and especially to produce the food. And what we see currently is great waves of land grabbing, water grabbing, grabbing of territories, especially into mining, where the resources are massively extracted to serve the interest of transnational companies and to serve the interest of rich people, mainly in the global north. So how do we cut from that? Is through agrarian reform on one side, and on the other side, we are advocating for a new trade framework based on food sovereignty. This is a trade framework negotiated in the UN and not within the World Trade Organization. We are against a reform of the World Trade Organization, but we do believe that we need to find space within the UN to negotiate, to have negotiation between countries on a new trade framework based on food sovereignty. So I will go quickly on what should be the principle of this new trade framework. First, of course, the food sovereignty should be at the center of this new trade framework. This is the right for countries to protect the local food production, the right to countries to have policies of market regulation, like having minimum support prices, having public stocks. And the main thing that is prohibited is that we think that export subsidies and other aggressive policies to reach market access towards other countries, that they should be prohibited. The second big principle of this new trade framework should be to have trade based on human rights and based on inclusion. So no country should be excluded from international trade. Right now, we have a situation with the World Trade Organization where so many countries are de facto excluded from international trade. If you think of Cuba, if you think of Iran, they are de facto excluded from international trade because of a bilateral, because of a unilateral decision from the United States. And that's not okay. We are refusing this. We do believe that trade can be useful, but that the same rules should apply for all the countries. We do also believe that regional trade should come before long distance trade. We do also believe that governments to governments contracts and other commodity agreements are important tools and useful tools for international trade. A third idea, general idea for this new trade framework is that we need to enhance the diversity of currencies. It's not okay to depend so much on US dollar for the international trade. So to diversify the use of different currencies, either currencies of different countries, but also material currencies, we think that it's a good way to democratize the international trade. The fourth aspect is that is the idea that food should never be a weapon. And especially what we see right now is that in the situation of wars and of natural disasters, very often the powerful imperialist countries are using this situation to impose their rules on food, either block food from entering into a country, like what we have seen for so long and what we see still now in Gaza, where Israel, with the support of the US, are making it impossible to have enough food to enter Gaza. But also what we see very often when there is a disaster or a war is the US imposing, for example, genetically modified organism to a country which has been up to now refusing GMOs. So for us, this is not acceptable. So we are proposing a set of rules to ensure that food sovereignty will be maintained despite situation of wars or situations of natural disasters. Last but not least, we do think that we need rules to ensure the protection of the commons. of the land, the water, biodiversity, against biopiracy, against international investment, against land grabbing, water grabbing. So these are the ideas as peasants and as small-scale farmers that we have. And I will put in the chat the document that we have written on tariffs in the context of this trade war launched by Trump. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morgan. We still have 15 minutes, so maybe if people want to write a question in the questions and answers button that you have down there in the Zoom, or you want to add something in the chat, you can do. In the meantime, what I would like to ask people, you have been discussing some of the things that from the trade unions, from the peasants' movements, you have been seeing that the scenario has changed. We have seen recently that our campaigns are already 25 years old. We have been seeing some of the debates against, for example, 20 years of no al ALCA in Latin America, of no to FTAA, right? So we're talking about a long distance from when free trade started as an idea in neoliberalism and what we have today. So I wanted to ask you if we can reflect together, because this is the discussion that we have started having in Latin America. Also, I've seen in Europe the debate that the ITJC is having is, what should be the response of social movements globally to this new trade and production scenario, right? Because we have to see that trade is not just trade, but it is the trading of a production system. And you have touched several of these topics with food, with how workers are consumers of the things that they produce. And in that sense, where should we focus as social movements, as campaigners, and how do we adapt our strategy to this new moment? How do we read this new moment, and how do we adapt this strategy to this new moment? So this is something that I would like to ask you three, if who wants to start with that question, and we gather more questions from the crowd. Melanie, do you want to start there?
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. The history of the movement and the achievements that we've won, like you mentioned. I think that's important to remember when times are very dark, that we have had victories and we will have them again. And I think it just comes back to what I was saying about the global solidarity. I think it's important for the people who've been leading these fights for decades to keep sharing the message that that it's not a binary choice between Trump's bullying, imperialistic vision of the global economy and the status quo, US and Northern dominated neoliberal system of the past. We are seeing a lot of people who say, Trump is tearing up the rules, he's not following international rules. We need the WTO to stand up and be respected again. And so, that's why I think it's important for all of us here to be sharing the message that it's not one or the other. There needs to be an entirely new vision, like what Morgan was describing. And, Our World Is Not for Sale network and ETJC have put together a statement of solidarity that we can drop the link in the chat. And hopefully after discussing some of these topics, folks on the call might be interested in endorsing that and sharing it with others. I'll pause there and see if my co-speakers have more to add.
Thanks, Melanie. Diego, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Luciana and Melanie. I think that's a very important question. And as trade union movement, we are trying to look at this as an opportunity. We've been pushing back against the neoliberal free trade model and the damages it's done, but we were in pushing back mode. And now we have a space of rethinking what kind of trade model do we want? What are the priorities that we need to put at the center of that model and how we can build it? And there's ongoing discussions, I know, around, not only within the trade union movement, but also many other movements around the world around this. and how can we rethink a different trade model, and something that we can put forward, and how we should be working together towards that. And I think that we have already some clear spaces where we can come together. I think that there's a consensus, and we've had it in this discussion, that tariffs are not bad per se, and certain trade tools that are forbidden by the WTO are useful for countries to develop their industrialization, can contribute to development. And we need to start on that basis of the kind of tools that should be allowed and the kind of objectives that they should be used towards, in order to start constructing an alternative vision of trade. And also trying to bring to this discussion other people that were supporting the neoliberal free trade model, but who have or should be seeing that this hasn't worked, that this hasn't produced results. We have the situation that we have now comes from bad policies that have been impacting people, and we need to react to that and bring more allies and change the narrative, basically.
Thanks, Diego. Maybe Morgan there?
Yeah, thank you. I think first we need to make this assessment that if the far right has been so much able to take this narrative against free trade, it is also because the left, at least one part of the left, has not done the job, especially the Social Democrats. And there, I think that there needs to be a big assessment of the mistakes that have been done in the left, and we need to discuss that. Well, in Europe, especially, I can tell you with the Social Democrats, because the problem is that they still haven't moved from that position, which is a position pro-free trade. So we need to have this discussion, because as long as the left is not really taking the flag against the neoliberalism, against free trade, we are leaving this space to the far right, and this is a big problem. So based on that, we also see as La Via Campesina that the weakening of the World Trade Organization can be an opportunity. And we have been seeing that already a few years ago with the fact that because of Trump, but then also of Biden, the dispute settlement mechanism was blocked. And so we see that the World Trade Organization is extremely weak. I mean, we are not even sure that within 3 years, World Trade Organization will still be there. So we think that we need to be prepared to propose an alternative. And that's the reason why in La Via Campesina, we started to prepare a draft, a proposal of a new trade framework based on food sovereignty. And now we've been presenting this to our allies in the last Food Sovereignty Forum in Sri Lanka in September. It was approved by the Fisher Folks movements, by the indigenous peoples movements, by the pastoralist movements, by all the food sovereignty movement, which has these different constituencies. So we want to move together against the WTO, against free trade agreements, for a new trade framework based on food sovereignty. But we know that in this framework, we need to include other visions, and especially we are very much interested by the vision of the trade unions, because this is very key. And we know that in some countries, it's complicated. If you have an industry which is export-oriented, you might be afraid about that. So we need to have serious discussion to say how we go together in order to defend the interest of the workers, wherever the workers might stand. So, but at least in Via Campesina, we believe that in this period, we need to be pushing a lot, even much more than before, not to be only defensive against the World Trade Organization and against free trade agreement, but we need to be discussing with countries from the global south, especially with the African countries, but also with some countries from Latin America and from Asia, to say, we need to get rid of this free trade agreement, and we need to build something else that really works for the people. So that's where we stand right now.
Thank you, Morgan. And we have, well, you have already started answering one of the questions that we have here from Chris. It's, what advice do the panelists have for those working for social justice on how to demystify and repoliticize issues of trade and investment that are typically shrouded in very technical economic jargon, right? That is a problem that we usually have in campaigns. We get so technical in the issues. How do we repoliticize these things, right? And how do we gather new people for this, right? He asked, how do we get to a wider constituency interested and engage with these issues? How do we go beyond the trade campaigners, right? In this, maybe is this a moment for repoliticizing, as Morgan was saying? How do we do that, or do we start thinking about that? How should we engage with other actors? Should we engage with other type of campaigns? Should we talk to a different audience? So maybe some ideas here. This is just to getting started, right? Because this is a very big issue. But maybe Melanie and Diego there also, if you want to respond to that. We still have some minutes, so we can move there.
Yeah, this is a core issue that we always struggle with, and we hope that we are trying to not use the jargon and reach people. One of the ways that we've been working on that is through showing the corruption of the Trump trade regime, that there's just a very clear through line between the biggest corporate interests, what they want, the money they give to him, and then the policies he pushes for through trade policy. And so you really don't even need to, be focused on trade per se to see the way that works. And so, I think trying to show that it isn't even really about trade a lot of the time, and that, Trump is pushing the same neoliberalism, but, through gunpoint this time.
Diego?
Yes,
Thank you.
From our side, we are actually faced with that all the time, in the sense that not all our affiliates know about the technicalities of the discussions of international trade, but they do know the impacts of different trade policies, because they suffer them when their factories close, they lose their jobs, their real purchasing power goes down. So we try and relate the impact of policies to everyday realities, and on the basis of that, put forward our advocacy and policy priorities. And that's why I was saying before in my intervention that our focus as unions is that international trade should contribute to decent job creation across the board. So decent job creation, fair wages, and implicit in that is also the development agenda, because it's across the board. It's not let's get some jobs over to one country from other countries, but let's make sure that all countries can benefit from this. And we need specific rules in place, but not deregulating rules, such as the ones that the WTO has been putting forward, but rights-based regulating rules. And I think that's how we try and keep our narrative linked together to people's reality on the ground.
Morgan, if you want to add on this, and we have a special question maybe for Morgan, because it's from Caroline, but if anybody, Melanie or Diego, also want to come in on this, it says if we can talk a little bit on the role of debt and of other currencies. Maybe we have time to bring that up, otherwise it's fine. Yeah, Morgan, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to highlight that this tariff war is coming at a moment where the ecological crisis is very high. And we believe that this is central to the reason why Trump launched this tariff war. It's linked to planetary boundaries. It's linked to this narrative, which has some ground, that there won't be enough for everybody. And indeed, if the rich people continue to want to get richer and richer, there won't be enough for everybody. So what we are saying is that here we need to share. We need to share the resources, because if we share the resources, if we produce what people need, there is enough for everybody to have a decent life. And so this is central to the discussion on trade, because in this context of planetary boundaries, we need to have serious discussion about what do we produce, how we produce, and for whom we produce. And here, for example, we don't want to produce big planes for the rich people to travel all over the world, but we do want to produce healthy food. We want to produce good housing conditions for the people, education, hospitals. what the people really need to have decent life. So this is an extremely political discussion that we want to have. And this discussion, I think, is accessible for everybody. Why are we working? What are we producing? And we want decent jobs, producing what is necessary for a decent life for everybody. So that is the core discussion. And I think that this is where we need to say to our government, we don't want just growth for growth. No, we want to discuss what do we produce to reach the needs, the real needs of the people all over the world, with the principle of equality. All human beings, we're all the same. We have all the same rights. And so we cannot grab the resources of people in the global south just to maintain the same way of life in the global north.
Thank you, Morgan. Melanie or Diego, do you want to react to that?
Not, I mean, I think Morgan answered that well. There was that other question that you mentioned on the role of debt or different currencies, and just wanted to quickly come out on that and saying that it is incredibly relevant, because actually the trade deficit in the US has been able to maintain that trade deficit with such a strong purchasing power because of the strength of the dollar. So that strong currency has a big impact on how US trade has been rolling out. And it's also a form of, I mean, it could be part of the Trump administration's hidden agenda as a way to devaluate the US dollar in order to rebalance the trade deficit. But indeed, there is a need for the development, I think, of different currencies. The hegemony of the dollar ties us all to that and has a big impact on interest rates related to and debt of many highly indebted countries. And so I think it's something that we need to factor into the picture. You know, economics is not an international trade. It's not just about trade. There's a whole ecosystem around it, and every different part of the economy plays its a relevant part and has an impact on other policies. So I think that's a good point, and maybe something that we should be looking more into. How do we complement the issues that we put forward, the priorities that we put forward in trade policy, with other priorities on a more just economic policy.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We are already 1 hour of this wonderful seminar that we had. Remember that tomorrow we have the second part of this, breaking down Trump's trade attacks and global solidarity. So remember to join that seminar too. And also remember to join the global solidarity call that, Melanie, I think that you shared in the chat, that we already have almost 100 organizations from all over the world that have joined that solidarity statement. We know that there are some questions that are there hanging, and we should be discussing in the near future. Some things that the three of you have said, this idea of, Morgan said, what, how, or for whom we produce. So again, we have this idea of, we cannot be just trade campaigners or just focusing on trade, but we have to see how production is being done. And Diego was bringing this idea of this trade, what happens with this trade policy and economic justice policy, right? How do we link these two? And Melanie was bringing that also, this discussion inside the US. So how do we keep these questions ongoing? We have this big challenge to keep discussing among our organizations and to see if we can go beyond just this strange situation where presidents like Lula da Silva is asking for more free trade. And so we are coming to a very critical moment. We're coming to a very strange moment that 20 years ago we didn't think that we would be living, but now this is where we are, and we should be rediscussing everything in order to try to have our strategies going in order to attain better results, right, politically. So thank you very much for joining. Remember that this has been recorded, so you can in the next days, you will receive the link for seeing the recording of this webinar, and join us tomorrow for the follow-up of this discussion. Thank you very much. Thanks for our 3 panelists, and remember to also sign up for our solidarity call. Thank you very much.